Welcome to my talk entitled Canada Supply and Demand. What can European markets learn from Canada for their accurate forecasting of demand in this new industry? My name is Daniel Yazbeck with Yazbeck Investments. To give you a quick outline here, I'm going to talk about the overview of the global cannabis markets today. We'll look at the European and German medical markets and their global suppliers. We'll take a deep dive into Canadian leading companies' revenues and their strategies in the coming years. We'll look at international flower and oil export markets. We'll then have a look at the global cannabis market forecast, looking at everything here. And then we'll look at some challenges for current and future exporters in this market. So to start off, let's look at the overview of the global cannabis market. Today, 43 countries around the world have legalized cannabis for medical use. 7 of those countries have partially or fully legalized cannabis for recreational use by adults. Despite global prohibition, over 200 million people worldwide consume cannabis every year. It's estimated that there are 1.2 billion people worldwide suffering from medical conditions for which cannabis has been shown to be of therapeutic value. The global cannabis market today, illegal and legal, is estimated to be $344 billion. Worldwide legal cannabis spending is only $14.9 billion of that in 2019, and that's up 46.1% from 2018. The U.S. Legal cannabis spending increased 36.5% to $12.4 billion in 2019. So out of the 14.9, 12.4 is coming from the United States, which is a significant portion of the global cannabis market today. Canada's legal market revenues increased 174% to $1.6 billion in 2019, and they're over $2 billion into 2020 forecast. So Canada is looking like a solid market as well. And needless to say, cannabis is one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing industries in the world. Let's look at the European cannabis market. The total retail value of that market in 2019 was between 230 to 250 million euros, as reported by MJ Business Daily. That figure includes isolated cannabinoids and finished pharmaceutical products in addition to flower and full spectrum products. So that's really the total gamut of products. Germany continues to be the largest European medical cannabis market, representing 73% of that, with an estimated annual sales of at least 170 million euros, about $185 million. Italy was a distant second with an estimated retail value of 20 million euros. So roughly half of this market, these market numbers we're talking about, are represented by markups by mom and pop pharmacies. So you can look at half that market to look at the actual value of product sold. The German cannabis market is the biggest market, obviously. 110 million euros of flower was sold into that market, so 5,700 kilograms were actually sold at an average of $20 per gram, 20 euros per gram. 60 million euros was extracted oil, so based on oil-based products, so full spectrum extracts, single cannabinoid preparations, as well as finished pharmaceuticals such as Sativex. The health insurers covered about 123 million euros of this. A little more than half of that amount was flour, so over 53% of sales are in the form of flour that was covered by insurance, but a bigger portion of that was sold. So it's mainly flour, 25% or so in oil of what Germany sold in this year. Pharmacies prescribed over 267,000 prescriptions, and the market's up 44%, so you can project it's going to continue in that trajectory for next year, for 2020. Germany's market will be, this is important, will be 100% dependent on imports for at least the end of 2020, when their first domestic harvests are expected. Even then, Germany will continue to rely on exports to fulfill its demand. So who's supplying Germany with cannabis? Germany imported 6,500 kilos last year in 2019 of flour. 54% of that came from the Netherlands, from Med-Cann in the Netherlands. 38% came from Canadian companies competing for that business, from Aurora, Canopy, Kronos Group, Tilray, and Wayland in Canada. Tilray has a facility in Portugal, and they've already been selling full spectrum extracts to Germany since 2018, but I think you see 8% in Portugal. Part of that's coming from Tilray. Now, C3 is the leading European producer of isolated cannabinoids in the pharmaceutical quality, and almost exclusively supplied to German pharmacies with this product category. In 2019, more recently, a company out of Israel started producing Drabinol and some other products to compete. But in 2019, Canada's Canopy Growth acquired Germany-based C3 in an all-cash deal for 226 million euros is, I think, the largest transaction acquisition in recent years for the European market, so that they can have a good hold on the German market's importation of this oil. So let's look at the Canopy, and let's look at their revenues and their strategy. So in their last fiscal year, they generated $400 million in revenues. 43% of that came from Canada's recreational market, 13% came from Canada's medical market, and only 18% came from international medical export sales, which is approximately 7 million, which is still a healthy number to start. International markets developed, though, at a much slower pace than Canadian CEOs had forecast. They had overbuilt, and in 2019, they right-sized their business, reducing Canadian production capacity by over 40% and took asset-light approaches. Other companies did the same. So they shuttered a bunch of greenhouses. They ceased operations in New York. They transferred all their African operations to local businesses, and they ceased cultivation operations in Colombia. So companies such as Canopy, Aurora did this as well. They've been downsizing, or right-sizing, I guess, so that they can find the right inventory and market fit. But the interesting thing with these companies, they're sitting on a lot of cash. Canopy's sitting on $2 billion in cash as of the end of Q4 2020. So they're in a good position right now to grow. Let's look at the product mix. So the top producers in Canada, on average, Canopy, Aphria, Aurora, generated nearly $100 million a quarter in medical and recreational market revenues combined. So Tilray was a little less, $30 million, but it clinched EU GMP certification in April 2020, positioning it to do well in the international export markets. If you look at Canopy's product mix, Canopy, in Canada, the recreational product mix was 89% flower. So in the recreational market, you're selling mainly flower in Canada, and for their global medical product mix was 72% oil. So they've been selling a lot of oil globally versus flower locally. Now, I've spoken to a lot of my friends in the industry, and active procurement specialists in some of these competing companies have stressed that actually the main demand right now is for flower. So greater than 80% of demand internationally is for GACP, GMP compliant flower, not so much the oil. But they also note, as global medical oil will become much more popular once vapes and, let's say, cannabis pills receive medical approval, that's a healthier dosed option. Those sales should increase accordingly. So let's look at the international cannabis flower export markets. So today, global cannabis producers are exporting medical cannabis mainly to Germany and Israel. 27% GACP, GMP flower can be bought today for as low as $3.50 a gram, but the German government said it would only buy future harvest from domestic producers at about $2.73 a gram. So they're still trying to find a good market price that meets everybody there. But assuming the $2.73 and assuming Germany grows at 40% plus, they should be able to import 8,000 kilograms of flour in 2020, making Germany a 20 million plus wholesale market for these people, for the folks that want to export to Germany. Wholesale market potential, and this is real numbers. Folks are actually buying and spending these numbers. So as of July 10th, 2020, of note is that Israel passed Germany as the world's largest importer of medical cannabis flower. As of early June, they imported almost 4,000 kilos of flour. And so by the end of the year, they should go over the 8,000 that we're expecting for Germany. And that should, and also Israel has looser requirements on the GACP, GMP compliance requirement, which makes it an appealing target market for folks entering into the international markets. Israel and Germany will likely be the only markets outside of North America in which more than a metric ton of high THC flower will be sold in 2020. So these still remain to be the main markets. And if we look at the oil markets, it's different. Australia is the only significant importer of high THC oil, with roughly 3,700 liters shipped in 2019, according to sources. So Germany and Denmark were a distant second with 790 liters and 336 liters. These three countries accounted for 90% of all exported oil out of Canada, and the remaining 546 liters were sent to 10 other countries. So a total of 5,372 liters of oil was exported out of Canada in 2019. Now, Mexico recently allowed imports of formulated products only, creating a new demand for isolated chemical compounds derived from cannabis. So that's going to help increase this market. And according to ArcView and BDS, recreational marijuana in Mexico Recreational marijuana sales in Mexico are expected to reach 582 million, close to $1 billion between the recreational and medical spending. So Mexico is going to be an interesting market in the coming years as well, um, as they continue to implement their legalization. So taking all this into account, let's look at the legal cannabis market worldwide. So importing countries today represent less than 1% of the upcoming global potential market. So there's close to 200 countries that can be buying or selling in the coming years. Europe is waiting on Germany to set up their medical program, and Germany's been rumored to start the recreational market soon as well. And so Spain this year also legalized. So you got all these countries coming on board. Projections from ArcView as well as BDS look at this market growing to 20.4 billion in 2020 from about 15 billion today, and to reach 46 billion in 2025 in the next 5 years, growing at 20%, I think, conservatively. So this is a definitely a market here to stay, and it's growing, and this is a realistic forecast of where we expect it to go. Now, if you look at international exporters coming online, certain regions in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East are poised to potentially compete in the export market with low production costs and optimal climate for outdoor growing that can allow more than one harvest per year. So these guys are coming on board. Lebanon, for example, legalized in April of 2020 the cultivation of cannabis for export. There's estimated 100,000 acres of hashish can come online within 5 years in that country, potential revenue of 1 billion. I personally have been involved in those legalization efforts with my group because we believe Lebanon could be an incredible export market in the future. And we've been working with politicians and local scientists and business folks and universities to make that happen. The Lebanese genetics are also very interesting in terms of the strains coming out of that country, which have a higher than usual CBD ratio, making them especially relevant to the medical market. So Colombia is also an exporter of legal cannabis, but only oil. The country passed a law. They don't want their local producers to compete with illegal growers. So the law allowed export of cannabis oil only, which forced local cultivators who are licensed to partner with local extractors to get more value out of processed oil. But there's a bill in Parliament now pushing against that, saying we're not able to export flour, and the whole world needs flour right now. The attraction is cheap flour at 10 cents a gram, which they could probably produce it at. So, and they're not really known for extraction. So there's a lot of dynamics at play there. Some of the additional challenges facing exporters today is mainly it's the GACP GMP requirement, right? You can't import flour into Germany unless it's GACP, good agricultural and collection practices, and good manufacturing practices approved and for those types of exports. So GACP standards really apply until you cut the plant. So until you grow it and cut it, you want GACP. You want to make sure that there's no bird flying over and maybe leaving some residue on plants. There's a lot of different standards to make sure you can grow under good agricultural and collection practices. Once you cut it, you are now governed by GMP requirements, which begin when you harvest until you package your plant. GACP standards are guidelines, really. You can have livestock, you got to wash your nets, store your tools, etc. There's no big regulatory bodies. There is EU GACP that's been coming out recently, but that's all in the process. Some companies even send their own certification officer to inspect and issue that permit. So GMP is more strict with various jurisdictions issuing certifications such as EU GMP, CGMP, etc. Now, a lot of Canadian cannabis producers might meet Canadian GMP, GACP, and GMP standards, but only a few of them are actually internationally certified for export. So I'll give you an estimate, maybe 160 licensed global farms, 80% of those are GACP, 10% of those, maybe about 13 farms are trying to become GMP. So other challenges folks might be facing today is even with demand and certifications and orders, countries like Germany and Canada have blocked imports of products for up to 3 months in certain cases, whether it's CBD in Canada or even THC-based products in Germany. Now, the U.S. is the biggest market and represents the biggest portion of the global cannabis market. So will this become an international market for people to compete in? Now, as it stands, 33 states have legalized medical cannabis, and of those, 11 have legalized it for recreational use. Cannabis sales in states that have legalized the plant for medical or recreational purposes generated about $15 billion in 2019 and $30 billion by 2024. California alone could bring up to $1 billion in tax revenue this year. But you can't cross state lines. We've got licensed distribution farms in California, and I can't cross state lines right now. So that market is isolated there. So this year, voters are going to vote in 5 states: Arizona, New Jersey, South Dakota, Montana, and Mississippi, on both recreational and medical. So that should continue to increase this market. And if Biden-Harris win, they've stated they would like to legalize it at the federal level. If they do, and they want their companies to export, they're going to have to allow others to import as well. The country to import, which should open up the U.S. If Trump wins, it might be a different story there. But either way, COVID-19 is going to push legalization further in most countries. Sales have gone up significantly since COVID-19 for various reasons. But the way I like to look at it, the end of Prohibition got us out of the Great Depression. Maybe cannabis might get us out of this COVID depression. So that's all for now. If you'd like to reach me, you can reach me at daniel@yazbeckinvestments.com if you have any questions. And thank you for your time.